All right, welcome back everybody. In the last video, we set up Firebase, and now it's time to start using Firebase. So the first thing we're going to do is work on the authentication of our app. I think this is the first dependency that most people and myself add into the app. It just makes the most sense. When you authenticate a user, after you authenticate, you get a user ID, which you can then use to set up their profile and basically perform all of the other activities. So we really want to get this user ID as fast as possible. And we really want to get it basically as soon as the app launches. So as I mentioned in the last section, this app, we are actually not going to require the user to sign in with Apple or Google and allow them to just start using our app without actually going through any sort of SSO. So user can just click through and enter the application. And then later at another point in time, we'll ask them if they want to go ahead and sign up with Apple. But even though we are not asking them to sign in with Apple, we still want to authenticate them in our backend, because we still want to get a unique user ID for that user. So in this video, we're going to set up Firebase anonymous authentication. I think most auth services have anonymous or some sort of auto-generated ID authentication at this point, and Firebase just calls it anonymous user authentication. I'm going to move slightly faster in this video because I did cover Firebase in detail on the Firebase Bootcamp playlist on my YouTube channel. I will link that bootcamp below if you want to really go into detail about how the authentication works. But for this video, we're more focused on how we're going to actually set it up in our app. So when we start thinking about dependencies, obviously we don't want to couple our dependencies to any specific view. So we know off the bat that it's going to be in a different file. And when I'm thinking about dependencies, I want to make a file specifically for Firebase. I want all of my Firebase authentication code in one organized location, one file, that I then will take that file and pass it around our application. So the first thing we're going to do here is open up our services folder. Let's create a new folder in here called auth. So anything related to fetching the user's auth or setting up the user's auth will be in here. In here, let's go ahead and create a new empty file called Firebase auth service, and we'll click create. Let's go ahead and import Firebase auth, and then we need to create either a struct or a class. And we need to figure out which of these we want to use. Again, in the last series, I talked a little bit about structs versus classes, and I will link that video below again if you're still confused. But generally in Swift, we prefer struct when we can, and if we can't use a struct, then we use a class. Structs are value types, classes are reference types. Value types are sendable by default, so they're going to be easier to work with in Swift concurrency by default. So generally, we're going to want to use a struct, and if we can't use a struct, we're going to want to use a class. Let's go ahead and create a struct and call it Firebase auth. We'll open the brackets. And inside here, let's create a function called sign in anonymously. Open the brackets. And then in here, we're going to access the auth.sign-in anonymously. It's async await. It async throws and returns an auth data result. Let's go ahead and make this try await, and we'll make this async throws and return an auth data result. I'm going to create one more function in here called get authenticated user. And in here, we're going to say if let user equals the auth.current user. So if we do have an authenticated current user, let's go ahead and return the user. This is of type user, so let's go ahead and return user. And then we'll just return nil. So we'll make this optional. So in my code, I'm going to check if there is an authenticated user. If so, we'll already have a user ID. If there is not one, we'll then go ahead and sign in anonymously, which should give us the new user ID back. I'm moving faster here because I covered Firebase in the bootcamp again, and I'm going to keep moving fast through the Firebase because this course is not about Firebase, it's about the architecture. Let's go ahead and use Firebase auth service in our app. So when we're talking about dependencies in Swift UI, there's basically one keyword that should come to your mind, and that is environment. So let's go back to our app view, and we already used the environment once. So here we use the @environment for an observable object. If I jump in here, we can see this was @observable and this was a class. The environment is basically just a dependency injection mechanism for Swift UI. We basically put something in an environment and then later we can pull it out of the environment. It's so that we don't have to manually pass this app state into the welcome view and into the onboarding view and into the next view and manually do that dependency injection. Instead, we throw it in the environment, and then when we need it, we'll just pull it out of the environment. The environment actually has two modifiers that we use. Environment object is old. If you're building for iOS 17 or above, you'll never need to use this anymore. So we're choosing between the environment object and the environment key path. We can see in the protocol requirements here that there is a difference. So the environment object needs an observable and any object. Those of you who used UIKit for a while will probably recognize that any object basically means a class. So if I'm using a class, I need to use this initializer, which is an observable object. If I don't have a class, if I have a struct, I'm going to use this initializer. So in this initializer, we can actually see that this is for the environment values. Value being the key word here, value as in value types. So if I have like an integer, an enum, boolean, or a struct that I want to put into the environment, I'm going to use this initializer. So to use this initializer, we're going to need a key path. And I will also put a video on key paths below. I did an entire video on how to use key paths in Swift. But this basically just means that we're going to need some sort of specific like key path, like we have \is enabled to access the value that we want in the environment. And then in here, we'll put in the actual object. So instead of actually initializing it like this, there is a new macro that does this for us. So let's jump back into our Firebase auth service and create an extension of environment values. I'll go ahead and import SwiftUI just for this view modifier. And the new macro is @entry. You've probably seen this on social media a bit. Let's create a variable and we'll call this the auth service of type Firebase auth service, and we'll set it equal to a new instance of Firebase auth service. So the environment value works a little bit different from the observable object. The observable object is only accessible in views that are children of the observable object. So you noticed, remember when we went and we created like the settings view and we pulled in the environment here? On here, if we did not put the app state into the environment, we got a crash because there would have been no app state in the environment. But you can actually see the other initializer here. This is actually using the key values. So the difference between these two is that the key values initializer gets automatically initialized here, which basically means that no matter where we are in our SwiftUI views, there always will be one in the app because this is always being initialized at the launch of our application. So that's why we're not going to get those crashes when we go and use the environment values environment. Let's go ahead and pull this into our application. So I'm going to go into our root of the application, the app view, and then inside the first SwiftUI view, let's go ahead and pull in the @environment. We'll access our auth service. We'll create a private variable called auth service. Now every time this view appears, we'll make a task. So this will run every time this view appears, which is essentially every time our application loads. Let's create a private func here called check user authentication or check user status, make it async, and we'll open the brackets. Every time the app loads, we'll await check user status. And like I just said, we're going to check if there is an authenticated user. So we'll say if let user equals auth service dot get authenticated user. If we get one, then we know the user is authenticated. We'll say else, then the user is not authenticated. So if the user is not authenticated, let's go ahead and try to authenticate them. Let's do a do catch statement here, and we'll try await auth service dot sign in anonymously, and that should give us a result back. Now the compiler is going to yell at us quick. So firstly, we have a couple errors that we're going to have to address. Non-sendable type auth data result implicitly returned by asynchronous non-isolated function. So the type auth data result is coming from the Firebase package, and for some reason it is not marked as sendable. So because it's not marked as sendable, the compiler doesn't know whether or not this is safe to use in async await. So if we go back to Firebase auth service here, this data type is coming from the Firebase SDK. So right now, if I left my code as is and I use this data type in my view, I have now coupled my view to the Firebase dependency, right? Even if we don't import Firebase, we're using a type that is originally coming from Firebase in the rest of my application. And while we could do that, that in some ways is considered a bad practice because now I've coupled my application to this data model. And honestly, I don't really know everything about this data model. I didn't build it. I don't have full control over it. And also, obviously, it's not marked as sendable. So most of the time when we use these third-party dependencies, what I like to do is as soon as we get the data model back, we first convert it into a local version of it, so our own personal data model, and then send our version back into the application. So up here, let's create our own version. We'll create a struct, and we'll call this the user auth info. We'll open the brackets. And just like this was not sendable, let's make sure this one actually is sendable. Now there's a bunch of data that comes through here that I'm just going to move fast and set up. So firstly, we're going to make this a data model just like we did with our other data models. So everything in here is a let, basically a constant, immutable struct. So in here we'll say let UID of type string, let email, we'll make it an optional string. So if the user does authenticate with their email, like sign in with Google, we'll then get their email. We'll say let is anonymous of type bool, so whether or not it's an anonymous authentication or the actual user actually went in and did sign in with Apple or something like that. There's more data that we're going to get from the auth data, but I'm not going to put all of it into our model right now, mostly just because we're not going to use a lot of it in our application. We're going to fix this by the end of the course and have all the data in it, but it's not really worth our time right now. So let's just go ahead and create two more data points, creation date of type date, creation date. So when the auth was created in Firebase, and the last sign in date is another date that Firebase gives us. So every time they come in, sign in. Let's go ahead and initialize one of these from an auth data result. So let's create an init. Let's pass in the user of type user. This is a Firebase user here. We'll set self.uid equal to the user.uid, self.email equal to user.email, self.isanonymous equal to user.isanonymous, self.creationDate equal to user. I think it's metadata dot creation date, and then self.last sign in date equals user.metadata dot last sign in date. Let's also create our custom initializer so that we can create our own version of these, and that should, let's comment this out. We should get the initial init here. There we go. Triple click Control M, and I will uncomment this out now. I'll give each of these a default of nil, so when we make mocks, we don't need to provide this data if we don't want to, and we'll set this equal to false by default. All right, user auth info. In here, let's go ahead and say let result equals this. And the result is going to give us back a auth data result. If I go and I look at the documentation for auth data result, it gives us a user that we're going to transform, and it also gives us additional user information. And inside the additional user information is a value for whether or not this is the user's first time signing in. So this is important because if it is a new user, then we're going to want to make sure that they go through the onboarding flow. If it is not a new user, then we're going to want to put them through the onboarding flow and put them right into our application. So in here, let's say let user. We'll create an user auth info from the result.user. And we'll say let is new user equals the result dot additional info dot is new user. And this is optional, so we'll do otherwise. We'll assume they are new if that value is optional, if that value does not come back, although it always does, so that's not really a worry. Let's go ahead and return both the user and the is new user. So here we'll make this a user of type user auth info, which is our new user type, as well as is new user of type bool, and let's return user is new user. While we're here, we also have a user here. So let's go ahead and return here a user auth info from the user. So now we are decoupled ourselves from the Firebase types, and we're going to send the user auth info into the rest of our application. Let's jump into our app view. Let's see if this compiles now. Sign in anonymously. And just like that, it works because now our new data type is sendable. If it is successful, then we can maybe log into app, do something in the background. Maybe we add the information to analytics. For now, let's just print. Let's print sign in anonymous success, and we'll print out the user ID. So the result dot user dot UID. For now, we can just print the error if we get one, which I don't think that we're going to get one. And then here, let's also just print out user already authenticated. And let's go ahead and pass in the user dot user ID, UID. So every time I launch my app now, this should run, and it should check that if they're authenticated, this should print out. If they're not, this should print out. Before we test this, we need to jump back into Firebase. Let's open up the Firebase console one more time. Let's jump into the authentication dashboard. And let's get started. In the authentication dashboard, we just have to check which ones we're going to use in our app. So we're going to use sign in with Apple in a minute, but right now we're just doing anonymous. Let's go ahead and enable that and click save. So now when I sign in, the user should appear on this screen. So let's jump into our app. Let's go ahead and run this to a simulator. And as soon as this screen appears now, we should get one of these things to print out. Either authenticated, sign in success, or an error. Open up the console and we can see that sign in anonymous success works. So regardless of whether I'm on the tab bar or on the welcome screen, every time the app loads, I will make sure that I have a user ID. So we should be able to see this in the console now. Let's jump into the console. Let's reload it. And there we are. Anonymous user with a user ID. And that's the correct user ID. I'm going to go ahead and just rerun this one more time. Let's build it to the simulator one more time. This time it should say user already authenticated. So we've set up our user ID now, and now we can use that in the rest of our app. I'm just going to go ahead and sign out for now. The sign out doesn't have any effect on the authentication just yet. So while we're signed out, let's just build it one more time just to make sure the user is still authenticated for our purposes. Cool. All right, so we've set up the ability to create a user ID through anonymous authentication. And now we can use that UID in the rest of our app. That's all from this video, but we're going to do more sign in the next video. So we're going to talk about actually signing in with Apple. Let's go ahead and Option Command C. Let's call this feature, and we'll call this sign in anonymous. Let's stage it, let's commit it, and push it up to GitHub. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next video.